What if one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of 2026 was hiding in one of the emptiest places on Earth? No buried city, no towering pyramid, no ancient temple covered in inscriptions, just endless desert. But when archaeologists looked at the Sahara from above, they noticed something strange. Hundreds of enormous circles were scattered across the landscape. They weren't natural formations. They weren't modern structures. They were ancient monuments. And the more researchers looked, the stranger the discovery became. A total of 280 monumental burial structures were identified, and 260 of them had never been recorded before. Some were almost 80 meters across. They contained the remains of people and animals, and they stretched across nearly 1,000 kilometers of desert. Who built them? Why were they buried here? And what happened to the people who created them? The answers take us back more than 5,000 years, to a Sahara that looked nothing like the desert we know today. Today, the Sahara is one of the harshest environments on Earth. Sand stretches toward the horizon. Rain is rare. Water can be separated by hundreds of kilometers. For humans, surviving here is difficult even with modern technology. But thousands of years ago, the landscape was different, very different. Northern Africa experienced a period known as the African Humid Period. The climate was wetter. Grasslands spread across areas that are now covered by sand and rock. Lakes and seasonal rivers appeared. Animals moved across the landscape, and humans followed them. Among these people were pastoral communities. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats. They moved between water sources and grazing grounds. They didn't build the enormous cities that would later dominate the Nile Valley. But they created something else. Monuments for their dead. And some of those monuments would survive for thousands of years. The mystery was hidden in the Atbai Desert of eastern Sudan. The region lies between the Nile and the Red Sea. It is enormous, remote, and extremely difficult to explore on foot. For years, archaeologists have been using satellite imagery to search the landscape. Instead of walking across every kilometer of desert, they could examine enormous areas from above. And patterns began to appear. Circular stone structures, again and again. Hundreds of them. The research team eventually mapped 280 monumental structures across the Atbai. 20 had already been known from previous fieldwork, but 260 were new discoveries. They had been sitting in the desert for thousands of years, hidden in plain sight. The satellite images transformed the way archaeologists saw this landscape. What looked like empty desert was actually filled with traces of human activity. But what exactly were these structures? They are known by archaeologists as enclosure burials. Many consist of a large circular stone wall. Some are enormous, up to approximately 80 meters across. Inside, archaeologists have found human and animal remains. In several excavated examples, a central burial appears to have been surrounded by additional burials. And that raises an important question. Why was one individual placed at the center? We don't know. The central person may have been a respected member of the community, perhaps an elder, perhaps a leader, but researchers are careful not to claim more than the evidence allows. What the structures clearly show is organization. People had to gather stones, transport them, construct enormous circular walls, prepare the burial, and return to these places over generations. These were not random piles of rocks. They were deliberate monuments. There is another clue. Animals, cattle, sheep, and goats appear among the remains found inside these monuments. For these ancient communities, animals were clearly more than food. They were essential to survival. They provided milk, meat, and wealth. A large herd could represent status and security. And in a landscape where water was becoming increasingly scarce, maintaining livestock required enormous knowledge. These people had to understand the landscape. They had to know where water could be found, where grass would grow, and when to move. The burial of animals alongside humans may also reveal something about their beliefs. Perhaps livestock represented wealth. Perhaps they were part of funerary rituals. Or perhaps animals were deeply connected to identity and social status. We cannot know exactly. But one thing is clear. These communities lived in a world where humans and animals were inseparable. The timeline makes the discovery even more fascinating. Most of these monuments appear to date to the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE. That means some were being built thousands of years ago, before the great pharaonic civilization reached its familiar form. These were not the pyramids of Giza. There were no massive stone temples like those that would later rise along the Nile. Instead, these were monuments created by mobile pastoral communities, and yet they were monumental. Their creators were capable of organizing labor and resources across enormous distances. They understood stone, they understood the landscape, and they developed traditions that lasted for generations. For a long time, the story of ancient Northeast Africa was told mainly through Egypt. Pharaohs, pyramids, temples. But the desert tells another story. A story about people who lived beyond the great kingdoms, people who left no famous names, but left thousands of stones behind. Then something changed. The climate began to dry. The African humid period was coming to an end. Rainfall decreased, grasslands contracted, water became harder to find, and the Sahara slowly transformed. For the people who depended on cattle, this was a devastating change. A cattle herd cannot survive without water, and without grass, there is no herd. The landscape that had supported pastoral communities was disappearing. People had to adapt. Some likely moved toward more reliable water sources. Others may have changed their economies. Some may have moved toward the Nile. The culture did not necessarily vanish overnight, but the world that created it was disappearing. And eventually, the monuments became silent. There is something remarkable about where these monuments were built. Many are associated with places where water once existed. Ancient river channels, rock pools, lake beds, seasonal sources. To modern eyes, these places can look almost meaningless. Just rocks, sand, empty valleys. But to the people who lived here thousands of years ago, these locations could have been essential. A source of water could determine where a community could survive. A grazing area could determine where a herd could move. And a burial monument could mark a place of memory. That means these structures may be more than graves. Together they form a map of where people lived, where animals survived, where water could be found, and where communities remembered their dead. And this may be the most haunting part of the discovery. We know that these people existed. We know they herded animals. We know they built monuments. We know their traditions stretched across an enormous area. But we don't know their names. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know what they called their communities. We don't know what stories they told, and we don't know exactly what they believed about death. There are no surviving books telling us their history, no royal chronicles, no famous kings, no written records explaining their world. Their history survives in fragments, bones, stone, pottery, rock art, and now, satellite images. For thousands of years, their monuments were waiting beneath the desert sun, and we are only now beginning to understand what they mean. The discovery of 260 previously unknown monuments changes something fundamental. The Sahara is not an empty space between civilizations. It was once a living landscape. People moved through it. Animals grazed across it. Communities formed. People died, and their descendants remembered them. Modern archaeology is now beginning to see this hidden landscape. Satellite technology can reveal structures that are almost impossible to find from the ground. And every new discovery raises another question. How many monuments are still waiting to be found? How many ancient settlements remain buried beneath the sand? And how many cultures disappeared before anyone ever wrote their names down? The 260 monuments in Atbai may be only one part of a much larger story. Look at the Sahara again. It seems empty, endless, silent. But beneath this landscape are traces of a world that existed thousands of years ago. A world of grasslands, water, animals, nomadic communities, and people who built monuments for their dead. They had no idea that thousands of years later, a machine orbiting above Earth would reveal the outlines of their world. They couldn't have imagined satellites, archaeologists, digital maps, or cameras looking down from space, but they left something behind. Stone, and stone remembers. Today, 260 of their monuments have been revealed, but the desert is enormous. And somewhere beneath the sand, there may be thousands more. This is hidden history, and the past is not gone. It is still waiting to be discovered.